As well as financial and weather displays, the service can provide information about future TV programs, racing and football results, even quiz questions and crosswords. News addicts can also be catered for.
News flashes, the idea there is that a person will be able to sit and watch television at home, having selected the news flash facility, in the knowledge that if a news flash does occur, then it will appear on top of his television picture, superimposed on his television picture.
Hello, I'm Carl Attrell, and you're listening to Teletext People. Teletext People is a social record of people that have been involved in either the production or the restoration or the artwork of the blocky medium that once dominated our TV screens in Great Britain before 2012. In the series, you'll hear from the pioneers, the people who made it tick, and also people who have only recently visited the teletext medium but are in their own way keeping it alive for the preservation for others in the future. In this episode we speak to Ian Irving. Ian is Teletext's first ever graphic artist and is a contemporary of many that came along afterwards. I started by asking Ian how he got into Teletext.
I had a background in newspapers, and at the time I was working at the Press Association in Fleet Street, which is, as you know, a news agency. And I'd been there about 8 years, I think. And although it was a good job and I did quite well there, it was getting a bit monotonous. And I happened to see the advert, BBC advert, advertising, the people wanted for this new technology, Teletext, CEEFAX. So I thought that would be a brilliant change from what I was doing. So I applied, and I had an interview with Colin McIntyre, which frankly I can hardly remember, but I think it was at Television Centre. And sometime later, I had a postcard from Colin saying that as long as I hadn't been a member of Hitler Youth or Communist League in my past, the job was mine, So that was great. That was a very unorthodox thing for Colin to have done, by the way, because as I later discovered, when you're applying for a journalistic job at the BBC, that they run a background check on you, which you're not supposed to know about. So if there's anything dodgy in your past, you get blacklisted. However, I got past that hurdle, and that's how I got to CEEFAX. I was, I think, a week or two after Mort, so it was one of the first news subs there.
What was a normal day at CEEFAX like when you first started?
Well, obviously it was intriguing because it was new technology, and it was using a VDU, a screen, which I'd never done before. And at that stage, very early stage, we were typing the stuff on screen and then running it off as a punched paper tape, which then had to be taken down several flights of stairs to the central apparatus room, where it was fed into a tape reader, and that was how it was then broadcast. All sorts of things could go wrong. The tape punch could tear the tape and make it unreadable, so you'd have to do it all over again. There's all sorts of things like that which one had to get used to. But that system was only temporary. And at that time we were working in a little cubbyhole of an office halfway up some stairs at Television Centre. But before long, they built a purpose-built office on the roof of the 7th floor, a kind of prefabricated office building, which was great. It gave us plenty of room. But unfortunately, there was no air conditioning or heating. So in summer, it was heated up like an oven, and in winter, it was like a refrigerator. Neither of those conditions was very good for the original computer that we had running there, which would tend to come to a halt many times in one day. Anyway, you probably heard about that from Mort.
Oh, would this be Esmeralda that needed a kick from time to time to start retransmitting the pages?
Yeah, that was eventually it was Esmeralda. I think there was an earlier version, but Esmeralda was the one that we remember most. It became much more reliable when eventually they were persuaded to put some air conditioning in, and that sort of problem was tended to disappear.
Of course, you were discovering all these things for the first time, because no one had ever done a broadcast television service before using a computer like that.
That's right. I mean, it was very new, obviously. There were, and at that early stage, there were very few people outside who could actually receive teletext, because there weren't that many decoders around at that time. Part of the interest was just seeing how the audience was gradually building up.
Yeah. Well, what sort of pages did you do as a sub-editor? Was it just mainly news, or did you have any other responsibilities on the service?
Well, it was mainly news, but I mean, I think we all did all sorts of things. We did have some research assistants who would compile TV listings and that sort of thing. Not necessarily. They didn't necessarily do all of that. So I think we turned our hand to almost anything. But it would have been mainly news and finance and sport. We had sport specialists eventually, but not in the beginning.
So, when did you first start using the graphical side of teletext? When did you discover that you could create pictures or bolder headlines using that side of the teletext software?
Well, almost immediately, I think. We discovered that there was this graphics facility, and I latched onto it at once. I mean, it was a great thing to play with. You had to discover which keys produced which shapes, because there was no kind of crib for it at that time. So you had to learn, as I say, which keys to use for your particular shapes. But it was great, something to play with, and I had a kind of amateur artistic background as well, so that came into play, along with my interest in typography from having been in newspapers. That also came into play. So one thing and another, sort of, it all added up to discovering what the graphics capability could do.
So when you were making a headline on the fly, were you able to just use the alpha codes and type them in a jumbled sentence and then just code it up as graphics at the end for it to reveal the artwork that it was intended to be?
Well, you could do it that way, but I tended not to. I tended to do graphics in graphics mode, so you could see what you were trying to put together, rather than just stick the alphanumerics in and then convert them.
Was it something that the service recognised that you had a talent for? Then you were sort of wheeled out to do graphics for other sections on the magazine?
Eventually, I think, yes. It was something I kind of made my own, as it were. Although almost everybody had a go, because it was a great thing to play with, and so there was quite a lot of experimenting going on. And some people were good at it, others not so good. But I always wanted to make things look as professional as possible, and not as if somebody had just been playing around, if you see what I mean. I think eventually I came to be seen as, the bloke to go to for graphics.
You've certainly been cited as a contemporary of many people I've spoken to so far, and in the wider Teletext community. Your techniques have certainly inspired others to go on and do the same thing as well. So I think you disguise your light under a bushel there.
Well, I don't know about that. It just happened to be something that I took to, and I just like doing it.
Yeah. So from there, then, how long did you work at CEEFAX for?
I was there for about 12 years, from 74 until 86. Yeah. So, yes, just about 12 years. When Mort Smith came back from America and took over Fortel at Intelfax, he invited me to join Intelfax, basically to do graphics. And, I was very glad to accept, because, apart from anything else, I enjoyed doing the graphics, but I was also by that stage, a bit tired of doing news stories, which I'd been doing for years and years. So in some ways, it was a great relief to go to Intelfax to be, in effect, a graphic designer and not a newsman anymore.
What new things did you? What new things were you able to do at the news service? I believe it was Fortel.
Yeah, it was Fortel, but it sort of branched out, because there were Intelfax took on lots of satellite broadcasters and other broadcasters for Teletext. So I found myself doing, graphics for all kinds of people. Sometimes I was loaned out to other companies temporarily. In fact, when Teletext took over from Oracle, I actually did a couple of weeks or more, I can't remember now, for Teletext, doing graphics to help them get set up. And in fact, I think I devised the kind of chunky type style that Teletext used. Although I won't swear to it, but I think that was one of the things I did for them at the start.
Was there any particular artwork that you were particularly proud of when you were doing this sort of work?
Yeah, what sticks in my mind now is the project called Hands Up, which was a series of programs commissioned by Channel 4 using animated teletext graphics. The idea was the brainchild of a Channel 4 producer called Sue Crockford, who thought it might be a good way of introducing sign language to children. So she and another Sue Harris, who taught sign language to deaf children, they got together and produced a story that was spread over 10 episodes, and they commissioned Intelfax to produce it. So I spent virtually a year doing animated teletext graphics to illustrate this story. I did have an assistant who helped me to create some of the characters, a girl called Carol Childs, but most of it I was doing on my own. Unfortunately, I had my own computers at home which could do teletext graphics, so I was able to work out of the office quite a lot of the time. But it was pretty intensive work, and Sue Harris would come in and have a look at what I'd done from time to time and tell me if it was any good. Being Australian, she was fairly blunt, and if she thought something wasn't up to it, she'd say, no, that's no bloody good, which would mean I would have to do certain things over again, because it was very difficult to illustrate hand movements in teletext terms, and they had to be right, otherwise kids could get the wrong idea. The animations, by the way, were only possible because of this gadget called the Write Box, which had been produced for Intelfax, which was able to output a sequence of teletext pages and insert them into the broadcast stream. So you could alter the timing at which the pages appeared. Even that wasn't fast enough for some of the animations in Hands Up, so we went to a facilities house where they were able to speed up the animations. So that was Hands Up. I think it was fairly successful, but it was probably a bit clunky in terms of actual television, and the story was a bit odd, but it was certainly unique at the time. I don't think anything like it has been done since.
Left hand.
So what sort of thing did you have to display on the artwork for that? You mentioned a hand, so would there be like something happening and the hand would be sort of like adding to the narration of the story?
Yeah, well, the characters would obviously be talking to each other, but using sign language. So you had to be able to depict the correct sign, the correct hand shape, and the correct movement, which could be a bit challenging, and weave all that into a storyline.
Well, yes, it's been commented by people that it was, you couldn't even get the curve right on the letter C of a Coca-Cola logo. So to get the curvature of a hand depicting, something in British Sign Language would be quite a challenge.
Yeah, it was, but I think using the separated graphics facility often helped, because that kind of helps to give a rounded off appearance to things. But you couldn't always use that. I didn't really get much feedback as such. I have heard since from Sue Harris, who's remained a good friend ever since. She's now back in Australia. And I heard from her that kids loved it, but teachers weren't that impressed with it. Deaf sign language teachers. But then there was a lot of sort of infighting among the deaf community, I think, over what should be done and what shouldn't be. So I don't really know how it went down. But
And you mentioned was it the right box? Did you say?
The right box, RITE, yeah.
And why was that originally made?
Yeah, it was for Envision Teletext. The BBC used it as well for CEEFAX AM and things like that. So they'd broadcast a sequence of teletext pages leading up to the first program of the day or overnight. So you'd get foretell on view, which would be, again, a sequence of teletext pages about forthcoming programs or that sort of thing, interspersed with brief animations, which was another thing I did quite a lot of. And eventually we also did for ITV Night Screen, which was a similar thing. It was a way of filling in airtime for the broadcasters, I suppose. But they're also useful for promoting their programs.
Can you tell me any more about Forty the dog?
40, actually, that started while I was still at CEEFAX at the BBC, unofficially, but it was known that I was doing it. It came about because Colin McIntyre, who was, the boss at CEEFAX for a long time, he'd retired, but he was retained as a consultant by Mort for Foretel. He knew that at CEEFAX I'd sort of created one or two cartoonish type characters, and he remembered the dog, and he thought it would be a good idea for Foretel to have a cartoon story And so I was asked if I could, create a sort of story of some kind around 40, the dog. 40 was Colin's suggested name, obviously because it was foretell, but also I think there was a certain there's a film dog called K9. So that I think that was in Colin's mind when he suggested 4T.
And the dog itself, I believe it was adopted as a mascot of MIT.
Yeah, it wasn't so much a mascot. It was I can't quite remember. I think he was president or something like that of the Students' Union. Manchester Institute of Technology, is it?
So with all the graphics that you were doing and being a consultant graphic designer, I guess, for all these services, how long did this continue for?
Until about 2001. I think that's when I more or less retired. So yeah, I was doing graphics all that time, but also I got sort of into newer technologies such as MHEG, and we were experimenting with interactive program guides and that kind of thing. So I wasn't entirely doing teletext graphics then, although that was still quite a large part of it.
And did you use a teletext service yourself for anything?
Oh yeah, I mean, I would always look at the teletext news and anything I was interested in, because it was such an immediate medium. I mean, obviously this was before the internet had really taken off. Yeah, I mean, I'd use teletext quite a lot, really.
How do you feel about the loss of teletext? Do you think it was an evolutionary thing, or do you think there was still time for it to run?
I think it was an evolutionary thing. Obviously, the internet had taken over in many ways, but I still found the red button text service on the BBC was useful, doing much the same kind of thing as CEEFAX had been doing, although not on the same scale. Although they threatened to do away with that, which I think would have been a mistake, but I was glad that it was preserved.
So, what do you do these days now? Are you completely retired, or do you still dabble in anything at all?
I've dug up my old BBC master computer on the BBC B lately in the last few years, and played around with those, sort of reviving stuff that I'd done, or looking back at stuff I'd done, including a lot of the 40s stories, some of which are online now. But apart from that, my main interest has been in painting and printmaking and that sort of thing. So I've been heavily involved with local art societies. Well,
thank you very much, Ian, for sharing your experiences of teletext with me. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Carl. I've enjoyed it.
You can see Ian Irving's work on 4-tonline.uk. Teletext People is presented by me, Carl Attrell, and is a bite-high, no-limit production. I really enjoy making these podcasts. However, if you want to help with the hosting costs, you can do so by buying me a coffee. You can find out how to do that in the program notes.